Hello, Autisticly Aaron Williams, back for the second episode of NeuroCast in partnership with my new platform NeuroNews, the first voice in neurodivergent media advocacy and activism. Straight back of the introduction episode that went out on Anchor and Spotify and a few other platforms. I've much appreciated kind comments from Twitter followers Deviant Dyspraxic, who I know is working on a podcast there herself, who owner from what she has told me coming soon. She also has worked with Pete Guest on Dyspraxic Life and Dyspraxic Circle to create a network for dyspraxic women called Dyspraxic Circle Women. You can find that community online, and she's also set up a separate from that dyspraxic LGBT group that you can find on Facebook and request to join now. She's also expressed a big congratulations in launching this platform, this podcast, to coincide with Indie Neuro News. Something which is still in its infancy and its early days, so still a bit of errors and glitches with the podcast, still getting used to recording this, as it's probably not as slick as it will sound, hopefully within a couple more episodes. She's amazed with such warm and I'm amazed with such and kind warm support. She's expressed the passion that I have come across in recording the introduction episode, which can now stream on Spotify, called Neuro News is NeuroFest. And also amazed with all the followers so far on Instagram and Twitter. You can now follow that now, and I also got a WordPress account now, where I also released a couple of blog series called Neurodivergency and me, couple in that series, rethinking a blog on education, and with Scarlett, one of the Twitter users, joining as a Twitter voice, as a neuro voice actually, to do a series of blogs first. She's got a first run an essay which you can now read now on Indie Neuro News, our WordPress blog. And also back to what Deviant Dyspraxic has already said. I went to credit. Well, me personally, I want to credit her for an influential role in creating this platform. I created this platform, but she kind of gave me the inspiration and the get-go for creating this, and congratulated me again on it. And I would like to congratulate her again on the support, and also congratulate support from Billy from Dyspraxic Help For You, who's behind, as I said, Dyspraxic Help For You, who's also started a podcast with other dyspraxics talking about that. His podcast is called Dyspraxic Help with the number 4 U. On his podcast so far, he's had a dyspraxic comic comedian from the America's Got Talent winner, an excellent star and star guest to have on his first podcast episode, John Hastings, and also on his second episode, Angus Monroe, singer-songwriter. I would also like to end up doing a podcast collaboration with Billy in the near future. That's yet to be discussed, and he's expressed warm support for my podcast congratulated me on it, so thank you to him. And he's had an accident or injury recently, so I'd like him to wish him well on that and wish him all the best. As I said, with crediting Billy from Dyspraxic Help for You event, I'm just pleased to hear how much he enjoyed and liked, which is pleasing to hear from another podcaster. It's great to hear amazing comments from people listening so far, so thanks you to anyone who's listened, and hopefully more can subscribe. After last week's recording of our introduction, I made a blog post on a WordPress explaining what was it like presenting the first introduction of the podcast, saying it was slightly nerve-wracking but rather exciting of course, to be able to create a platform where I can share with others about my own experiences and creating a network where you'll be able to talk to others about neurodivergent issues. I actually decided you could say, after listening to what nice comments from my subscribers, and after getting it up and ready to listen on Spotify, I describe it to myself, to listen back on Spotify, which I did, and I found it was quite pleasing. Normally find it quite cringe-worthy to hear my own voice back, but I think I was rather comforted. In a sense, I'm quite proud now that I've developed such a platform where I can share with others, like-minded others, about my own experiences to engage and learn in such a conversation. I personally find opening about my own personal experiences, being autistic and dyspraxic, in a blog series and on social media now in a podcast is quite, in a sense, nerve-wracking, because opening up about close and personal stuff isn't quite an easy feeling, but as I said, listening back, I was pleasantly surprised with the sound. As I said, quite a few things to work on, in terms of scripting, getting used to presenting a podcast, communicating in such a way as it's different to writing a blog post or tweets now to be actually speaking with you. So I'm glad for your support in going through the trial and error period of launching this podcast. Now, after that introduction, I feel like it's now time to introduce and set up the basis of what this podcast is, introduce you to the meat, or if you like myself, a vegetarian, the tofu of the podcast. Whatever you prefer. As in the introduction is stated, what I want to focus on different host of issues and subsections under the umbrella of the term neurodivergency, exploring what this term means, get into different definitions, dimensions and strands of such an umbrella term and wide meaning term. In this episode, I want to introduce you and give you a taste of what is yet to come and what you can expect from this podcast. I'm going to do a section and segment called Neurodivergency and Us, where which you can be able to hear me chatting to like-minded neurodivergent activists, advocates and different public for people within the forum of neurodivergency, so we can be able to connect different individuals and different people working in this sector to be able to, within this community, have an interconnected conversation about different experiences. I will also be wanting to talk to anyone who links with the themes of the different podcast episodes, and anyone who's got a different experience and thought on this topic. you're going to expect me to be able to pass the microphone, as that's what this whole podcast is about, giving a platform to others, expand on neurodivergent voices to be able to grow a platform. You are going to expect to hear a series in this podcast, a segment called Rethink, discussing the different alternative ideas for change in a post-pandemic society of what the message Build Back Better could mean if progressive politics could listen to us and focus on what is important in terms of change. If politicians and people in power were to listen to improving services so that it can represent neurodivergent people. As I said about Rethink, I want to have a conversation about the different political and economic powers that we can have a conversation about the change needed to address the ableism neurodivergence face in a so-called neurotypical world. Open headed next year's Senedd, Hollywood and mayoral elections happening in Britain, to have talks and conversations around different political parties, policies on neurodiversity and different political ideas ahead of that. We also have different research happening behind the scenes in neurodiversity and different ideas of where, we want to see research being heading into. We also are going to have a feature called STEM Pride Showcase, which goes hand in hand with the new hashtag STEM Pride Sunday, encouraging people to share a post on Instagram or Twitter about them stimming, celebrating stimming behaviours. There's going to be a brief bit on a podcast coming up about that, a segment in a future coming episode about what STEM Pride is and what stimming is. And we could have a feature called Me and My Interests, which I hope is going to be a great feature from my guests, and something my guests will share as quite like a favourite feature, like a place and time in the podcast where people can just info dump and say what they're interested in, and which is tend to be quite a big thing about people with a neurodivergent condition, as it tends to be like a positive thing that can focus on a certain aspect of area of interest. And we're going to have also another subsection called What Is, where we're going to be breaking down different ideas and arguments which requested by our guests and listeners to explain, and to hopefully explain to any listener, NeuroCaster listener, that what questions and queries of different jargon and terms they hear it in neurodivergent language that they don't quite understand. So we could have me and my guest trying to explain it, so we're going to have different ideas what different terms means and different experiences. So we're going to be breaking down terms like stimming, executive functioning, dyspraxia, and we're going to have also a section of your thoughts, looking at the tweets you sent to NeuroNews and emails sent in by my NeuroSquadcasters, which is the term I'm hoping I will catch on, at least in home, any home. Well, on to my first guest. It seems like I spent a lot of time rambling on about what this podcast is without introducing our first guest. But this has been recorded in a different format. I'm expecting of recordings of interviews to be recorded in. We got first a segment of neurodivergency, and this is autistic, dyspraxic, and she also has ADHD, is a comedic YouTuber and TikToker, Sophie Lavender, who will be welcome into the podcast. The way she recorded this was she sent over an MP3 audio file over to myself, pre-recorded. So what's going to happen now is I'm going to have to tweaking and editing their answers for the questions, so probably little time for follow-up and questions, and hopefully it'll sound slick and professional as I edit it. But it's kind of like very anxious and thing for me, to be able to talk to guests in the first place. So I thought, this idea was suggested by you, and I thought, great idea to get used to talking to other people on a podcast. It's going to be great to have now coming up on a podcast somebody who's had more experience in a broadcasting yourselves to people as she has with her own podcast, and she's also done stand-up comedy. This is the first time she really got into YouTubing and expressing her autistic self since lockdown. You're going to be able to hear from her about her special interests, travelling, and a whole host of different stuff coming up on the podcast. Next is Sophie Lavender. So I first asked Sophie about her experiences with lockdown and her anxiety.
Let's go. So the way coronavirus has had an effect on me personally really depends on the stage of isolation that I went into. I am a shielder, so I have had to try extra hard to resist the temptation to go to shops, pubs, etc. But at the beginning of lockdown, when there was a huge change in routine, it kind of felt like overnight everything had changed. And for a neurodiverse person, particularly for an autistic person, change can be quite anxiety inducing. So I had a lot of anxiety at the beginning of lockdown. Certain other things as well that I really enjoyed had to stop. Instantly, no ifs, no buts, they had to stop. And that includes my special interests. Pretty much most of my special interests stopped overnight for a while. I'm really into driving, and I was on a ball with my driving lessons. I was on a roll with it. I could say I was really driven by the concept of driving, and I was driving every week for an hour and a half.
I'm really glad that on this podcast that Sophie Lavender is sharing her experiences with her special interests and how the coronavirus has impacted enjoying those special interests, as she said, about driving and photography.
It just felt really cruel, and it felt really mean, and it was emotionally, it was overwhelming, and other special interests as well, such as photography had to stop. I photograph people and places. That is my thing. I occasionally do photograph products as well, but the majority of my work is working with other people and travelling. And of course, with lockdown, having to stay away from people and not being allowed to travel meant that my photography stopped as well, and I lost gigs, which was really sad. And yeah, it was just all the things that I really enjoyed just stopped, and it was very distressing at first. And so I had to find ways around that. And one of the ways around that I kind of wiggled my brain into thinking about is doing something that I've always wanted to do. And I've always wanted to make videos on YouTube. I didn't know what, to be honest, for a long time. I was like, I really want to do this, but I'm a bit stuck. And I also really wanted to do it, but I didn't have the time.
Before this, when I decided to interview Sophie Lavender, we had a quick chat to talk about her special interests and what we could discuss on the interview. And she said that she's a stand-up comic, and what I decided to do is, with getting her on interview, is just to get somebody on who's quite experienced in doing stuff like this, as she's got her own YouTube channel, which she started during lockdown, as she will go on to state what she has decided to do with her YouTube channel now.
So I try to look at the positive things of being in isolation and being in lockdown. And one of the things that stood out was that I had the chance to do something. And I was talking to a friend about how lockdown and autism and how that's impacted me and how that's impacted my friends. And someone was like, well, why don't you do a Q&A? Like, everybody else is doing live streams, why don't you do one? And I had to think about it, and I think I literally last minute was like, okay, right guys, this Saturday, ask me anything about autism, about how it is being an autistic person in lockdown, all that jazz. Ask me out, I'll tell you anything about my bank details. And yeah, and some people messaged me questions beforehand, which was super helpful because it gave me time to think of how I was gonna answer them, and also it gave me a chance to research anything.
I hope she didn't give out her bank details. Well, it's good to hear about her Q&A she's been doing, Sophie Lavender, and I hope with this to do some question and answers. Won't be giving out any such personal details, of course, but it'd be great to know what type of questions we can discuss on this podcast. And I find Sophie Lavender, I find it's best to give myself some time to research and prepare answers for the podcast, as I want to be able to give myself a chance to prepare what I'm saying.
That I needed to research so that I could give them the best answer possible. And disclaimer though, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a counsellor. I don't work in mental health. I just really like psychology. That's another special interest of mine. I like reading about how brains work. I think it's fascinating. So yeah, I did the Q&A and that went down really well. Uploaded it to YouTube because I thought, well, the more people it helps, the better. And then I just kind of thought, you know what? Why don't I just talk about autism stuff? People are obviously interested in hearing about what it's like being autistic and how to make things more inclusive to autistic people. So why not do that? And that's what I did, and I definitely think it's been one of the best decisions that I've ever made. And I don't think that would have happened had I'd not gone into isolation and lockdown. So I guess
I think personally I can also agree with this, that I don't think this podcast and NeuroCast news would exist without the chance of the lockdown and the pandemic. In a weird way, it kind of gives me a chance to reflect on how I went to open up and actually discuss such things personal to me as my own autism and dyspraxia.
The way when I think about how has going in lockdown impacted me, I try to think positively. Yes, a lot of things got taken away from me. Yes, it was emotionally painful. It was, for the first two months, it was hard, it was tough. But on the other hand, I have saved a lot of money. I have started doing something that I've always wanted to do, and I've made new friends through doing this as well, which is great. That's always a bonus. And another kind of after effect of doing this, I've had a little bit of a confidence boost, because my confidence was not for a while last year because of anxiety and stuff. And so I kind of feel like I'm getting back into my old self, which again is another huge positive. So my advice would be to anybody wondering about what they can do if they're still struggling with the coronavirus and the lockdown situation, is to look at it from a different point of view. what can you get out of this new time that we have? And if you're back at work, I pray for you. It looks like chaos out there. Like I said, I'm still trying my best to shield. I think I've been out to the supermarket a couple of times for essentials, but when I have been out, the energy has been chaotic. So I really hope you guys are doing okay if you're back at work. So yeah. So would you be wanting to share?
I do find I understand what Sophie Lavender is saying. It gives a chance to actually find, what the positives within lockdown, because, it has been quite a hard time, and I hope everybody's been okay throughout it. But, it does give you that space and, I guess, chance to reflect and try to find such a positives or something, to keep you motivated. And as she also said, it gives you a chance to, start new projects during a time where you've been certain and thinking about what to do with your time. As she said, she lost confidence before, but now we've started her own YouTube channel. It's kind of given her confidence to open up and create her own narrative.
In terms of how you are neurodivergent and these conditions, yeah, so I was diagnosed with, originally it was Asperger's / ASD, and then they got rid of the Asperger's, which I'm totally fine with, because recently in lockdown I've been doing a lot of research on autism stuff, so that when I do my videos and do the tweets and the TikToks and things like that, I want the information that I pass on to be legit. I want it to be helpful, and I want it to be genuine. So I've gone away and I've researched so that I can get it right, so I'm not passing on any fake news or anything like that. And I came across the history of the word Asperger's and the history of Asperger, and yeah, that guy was really problematic, wasn't he? And I definitely understand, and I definitely agree with why people have stopped using the word Asperger. I've never really agreed with functioning labels anyway, and I think some people being like neurotypical people in positions where they were working in mental health, you still used Asperger as a hierarchy of whether somebody is closer to neurotypical or further away from being neurotypical, or high functioning or low functioning. So yeah, I'm glad that they've dropped the Aspi word. And
they've created this platform like Sophie Lavender has, that I want to be able to extend my knowledge and further understand these conditions like autism and stuff like that, to better understand for myself and to be able to find a way of communicating that to others. And like Sophie Lavender said, I want to be able to research, get the knowledge from others.
look at the positive things of being in isolation and being in lockdown. And one of the things that stood out was that I had the chance to do something. And that's like, for me personally, if you're unaware of the history, now is a good time to look it up, because history is fascinating. But some people still feel that the word label Asperger fits them the best. So some people see it as a thing of personal preference, but I see it as, if you're aware of the history and you're aware of how it affects other people, then you have to have a think about whether it is worth still having that label. But yeah, sorry for going on a tangent. I'm
gone on a tangent already on this podcast. In the introductions, I felt like I've gone on forever introducing this podcast before even getting into the interview. So thank you for listening so far. Anyway, still a bit more to come with Sophie Lavender. Agree with her on the pieces of the term Asperger's, like the controversy of the history of the term, and that's why I kind of prefer these days to use the term autism instead of Asperger's, as I understand the history, if you were to look into that, the history of the person, the condition.
We still have feelings, and sometimes people talk about autism and ADHD and neurodiversity as if the person who is neurodiverse is not in the room, which is rude, am I right? But yeah, I would like it if people kind of understood that we are more alike than we are different. Yes, sometimes things can be challenging, things can be awkward and not quite on the same path, but we still have hearts, we still have light, and we still have feelings. And autistic people, we do have empathy. That is a thing that we have, believe it or not. We do feel what you feel. I think the problem is, or should I say the obstacle is, that sometimes we don't always communicate the same way as neurotypical people. And maybe neurotypical people should think about how do we as autistic and ADHD and neurodiverse people communicate.
As a neurodivergent myself, being autistic myself, I find empathy is not a problem as such, but I see it more as something that we can be overwhelmed by, and almost as a sense in itself, where we can get sensory overload from the amount of empathy and emotional input we receive. So I think that kind of explains how we as autistic people experience
neurotypical people
empathy
to know about being
express it different.
Is that they should listen to us. Just listen to us. Listen to our stories. Listen to what we have to say. Listen to our experiences. And I think, if we share stories and share experiences, only good can come out of that. My inspirations comedy-wise, come from Bo Burnham, who is iconic, amazing. I love his style of comedy. And when I first started doing stand-up, I tried to take that style and make it more my own. So it's kind of like the Bo Burnham blueprint, as I call it. I also like Weird Al. I listened to Weird Al a lot as a kid, and that's never left me as an adult. I also listened to the funny songs that I listened to all the Tenacious D songs, but also as a kid I listened to the funny Tenacious D stuff, and that was really good. And the kind of comedy shows that I've watched the most growing up was the IT Crowd. There was also South Park. But now I really like comedies such as The Good Place, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and stuff like that. So there's a wide range of different comedy styles that I really like, and in different mediums as well.
Sophie Lavender on, I really wanted to ask you about stand-up comedy and her comedic influences. As for me personally, I'm really passionate about comedy and find it's an interest of my own. I also agree with her that Brooklyn Nine-Nine and A Good Place are excellent TV shows and would thoroughly recommend them, especially The Good Place, as I found it's one of the best comedies of the last 10 years. Another question I also asked Sophie Lavender is what changes you would like to see in a neurotypical world to make the world more accessible and society more accessible.
One thing that I would like to see change to make the world more accessible to neurodivergent people is understanding. I want more people to understand. It's easy to say, oh, well, places should have this and have that. But I think the key step towards unlocking the door to lots of other ways the world can be more inclusive is to start by just understanding and seeing autism and ADHD as like, yeah, we're different, but we're not less than you. There's a famous kind of like quote that goes around the autism community that I really love, and it's one of the first things that I learned when I was first diagnosed autistic, was the different, not less. And that is exactly what it is. It's different, it's not less than. And I think if more people understood us in a way that's different and less, as I keep saying, then that, like I said, it will open the door to more things being accessible, because then people who are designing buildings or planning events will have autistic people in mind if they understand us properly and not go by problematic stereotypes such as Sheldon, which, yeah, there may be one autistic person out there in the world like that, but for the majority, we're not like that. It's a spectrum. We are all different, and it's all beautiful. So yeah, if people could understand more about autism and what it's like being autistic and how we see the world, if they try to see the world through our lens, then they will start to hopefully instinctually make the right accommodations, because they will know what they need to do when they're making an event or they're building a building or doing something or planning a course and things like that. Just a lot of understanding, a lot of love, and a lot of empathy towards us as well. Remember, autism, it's not a pandemic, but ableism is. So the different ways that I stim really depend on where I am and what I'm doing. When I'm at my desk at my computer, I like to swivel on my office chair. I've got like a little office chair, and I like to kind of like rock side to side on it. I like to tap pens. I like to comb through my hair because it's like a sensory thing. It's soft. And when I'm out, if I'm wearing jewellery, I'll fiddle with my jewellery. I'll fiddle with my phone. I had a pop socket on my phone, and I just kept popping it in and out. It was really satisfying. I don't know why. It just was. It was incredible. It was amazing. And I just kept like popping it in and out to the point where the pop socket actually broke. So I need to get a new one of those for sure. So yeah, it really depends on where I am and what I'm wearing. When I'm at home and I'm downstairs, I'm away from my desk, if my dog is there, I'll kind of like stroke the dog, because stroking my dog down calms me down, as I'm sure it would do anybody. If you've got a dog, dogs are magic, we all know this. And trying to think of other ways I stim. Finger tapping for sure is another one. But I would say the most stimming that I do is fiddling with items that I'm holding in my hand, jewellery that I'm wearing, and if I'm sitting on any chairs, that can swivel. Anything that can swivel and spin, it shall be spun. So my favourite places to travel. Now this is going to sound like the complete opposite of what you'd expect from an autistic person, but I really loved Vegas. Like, you'd think, why would an autistic person like Vegas? There's loud music, there's crowds, there's flashing lights, there's lots of vibrant colours, there is stuff going on here, there and everywhere. In every little corner of your eye there is something flashing, buzzing, pinging going on. Like, that sounds like hell to like an autistic person. Like, usually I wouldn't like that. I wouldn't have a tolerance for it. But something about it really appealed to my ADHD. Like, you know, it's like when you're playing Candy Crush and you've got the sound on and it's like ping, 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 woo, ping, 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 woo, 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 all the time. And it just, it hits that dopamine. There was something about Vegas that really hit all the dopamine spots, man. It was brilliant. And yes, I really liked Vegas. I really liked going as well to Disneyland Paris. I love Disneyland. I like to dress spooky, but really, I love Disney. I love that stuff. And other places that I like as well, I'm really into cultural places. And now I've just said I like Disney and Vegas, which kind of has its own little culture within itself. It's just not like a culture that would be a typical culture of a country or a place. But I do like to have like different culture. When I visit somewhere, I want to learn when I travel. That's the thing. I like to learn as I'm traveling, and that is probably how it appeals to being autistic and my autism traits. So places that I've travelled.
I think from this, I'm really getting a gist from Sophie Lavender of how autism really is different for everyone and neurodivergent conditions are. As she expressed how when she's been to places like Vegas and Disneyland Paris, she enjoys the sensory seeking of the bright lights, the loud noises, which to some who have autism or are autistic even, you can find quite a challenge. So it just goes to show how different experiences are different for others.
Being autistic and my autism traits. So places that I've travelled which have been brilliant. Berlin was incredible. I learned so much about history during the trip to Berlin. I went with my history class, of course, so it was packed with museum trips, tours, learning all sorts of stuff about the past. It was incredible. And I also really liked going to Barcelona, which I went with my Spanish class, and that was there to learn about Spanish lifestyle, Spanish culture, the history as well of Barcelona, the architecture, the art stuff, because the art kids went as well. I also really liked going over to Greece. I'm kind of just rabbiting on about all the different places I've been, but yeah, you get the idea. I like to go somewhere that really makes me think, but is also really fun. And so I love city breaks. Countryside breaks, not too sure. I did those as a kid, but we always travelled into towns and cities to explore. So I don't know whether that still counts. But I like city breaks. I like to be, when I'm on holiday, I want to be busy. When I'm travelling, I want to be busy. I want to be learning. I want to have all the stuff going off all at once. Yeah, I'm tired at the end of the day. I'm knackered, but it's fun. I find that fun, and my autism card may have been like revoked for saying that I like to have everything in my face when I travel. Like when I'm at home, I like being kind of at a distance in the quiet in my own little cave. But when I'm out with the intention of exploring, I want everything. I want it all. It's brilliant. So yeah, to kind of segue into the future of my vlogs, when I am able to get out and about again, there are lots of things currently being planned to talk about travel whilst being autistic. That is definitely something that I want to go down. And I want to kind of use my experience of being an avid traveller, world explorer, wanderlust wanderer, and to talk about travel whilst being neurodiverse. How to make accommodations for yourself when travelling, but also how to find accommodations when travelling, such as when you go to Disney, you can get, like last time I went, it was 2014, so that's about 6 years ago. But back then, when I went to Disneyland Paris, you could get like a green card or like a green piece of paper thing, and you showed it to a cast member, and that would get you straight onto the rides without queuing, which is amazing. We can't lie about that. As we got to share those tips. I know some of you guys might be off to Disneyland Paris now that it's reopened, and you might be thinking, well, what is there? Well, there's definitely that, so you should definitely go get that sorted out. And yes, I kind of want to share my knowledge and share about what you can do to make traveling fun, immersive, and exciting when you're neurodiverse, and what accommodations you can have for yourself, what accommodations you can find when you're going out there. And also another thing as well that I want to touch on is, like, when you're traveling, how to have a backup plan for when you have a meltdown. Like, I know Vegas is overwhelming, but I had a backup plan, and my plan was that if I felt overwhelmed, that to go somewhere and sit down where it was quiet. And yes, there are such a thing as a quiet place in Vegas. Those are usually the Starbucks, the coffee places, and also it depends on when you are going. I went during October. I went during early October, and it was quiet. I was able to sit in the top floor of the Hard Rock Cafe in a booth, and there was like nobody else around me for like 10 meters. It was wonderful, and I got to still people watch and see everything that was going on. So yeah, I definitely think that there's little things like that are definitely worth showing, because they could really make a huge difference to somebody's trip, and that is something that I definitely want to do a series on with my vlogs.
I find that Sophie Lavender's had some excellent tips and personal experiences from when she's been travelling herself, something that you will be addressing in the future YouTube videos when she's be able to travel again, which are quite helpful for other neurodivergents, autistic people or people with ADHD who are travelling.
Window and look at sharks, and I like sharks. There's quite a few other people on the spectrum I know who like sharks, so we are the shark fam. So yeah, and sensory experience, let me think. I know when I went to Disney Paris, the roller coasters were brilliant, but there's two types of sensory things with being autistic, and ADHD and neurodiverse, and I think those can overlap. You're never always completely one or the other. It definitely does depend on where you are in the situation that you're in. But when I go traveling, I am a sensory seeking person, whereas where I'm at home, I'm kind of like a non-sensory seeking person, sensory fleeing person. But when I'm in sensory seeking mode and I'm traveling, I like things like going on rides, watching shows. I love theatre. I've always been a big theatre supporter. Theatre growing up really helped me as an autistic person kind of learn how to socialize, how to read facial expressions, how to do facial expressions. So like I don't feel like I'm masking sometimes. It started to become natural to do facial expressions because of going to theatre a lot as a kid and being in theatre groups all the time as a kid. That's a different tangent. Sorry. But yeah, so I like watching shows, I like going on rides, I like immersive stuff. One really good thing that was really engaging was in Vegas. I did the CSI experience where you had to be a detective and solve a crime. Really, you're only supposed to solve one crime, you pay to solve one crime, but I went round them all because I was like, this is so fun, I'm a detective! And I went mad. And I got like my fingerprints done, and I got a hat, and it was great. So really immersive stuff that's all in your face. Yeah, I like that. So
with the last question that I asked Sophie Lavender, it was when sent in from an Instagram story I did, asking people for questions to ask in this week's podcast. Remember that for future podcasts, you'll be able to send in your own questions, and I'll be able to get through this in a question and answer style. Would like to say huge thanks you to our first guest, Sophie Lavender, for coming on and talking so optimistically about her experiences throughout the pandemic, her special interests, and the whole idea of thinking that people are becoming more able to listen to autistic and neurodivergent people through the means of what we say in blog posts, YouTube channels, and podcasts. Just a final bit to wrap up. Coming shortly, you're going to expect more episodes looking at different aspects of neurodiversity under the umbrella term. So I'm planning to do different episodes on chronic illnesses and self-care, different umbrella strands of of neurodivergent conditions, and people can relate to with neurodivergencies. Feel free to submit your questions to us via email or find in our social channels, ND Neuro News on Instagram and Twitter and on Facebook. Find us there, like us, subscribe, and look out for our content and our WordPress. And we're going to have a content list of what we would discussed in our WordPress to give a brief summary of the podcast, like a transcription, if that's more accessible to you. And also feel free to, if you're a sensory seeker and a stimmer, to get involved in the hashtag Stimpride Sunday, which is happening every Sunday, a different time different schedule in a week, so people who are stimmers can celebrate stimming behaviours. We're gonna have a bit more on that in future episodes as a part of the StimPaid showcase that you'll be able to find on the Neuro News website, WordPress. And thanks you to Neuro Squadcasters for listening, and listen out for future episodes. Subscribe now on Spotify, and remember to give us a review or share this to your friends or wherever so they can become Neuro Squadcasters. Get involved if you have any future ideas for the podcast. Great. Hear you next time.